Hey guys, welcome back to Under the Influencer, where we interview social media personalities from all aspects of the aviation industry. Each week, my guests and I try to provide insight as well as inspiration on how to grow your personal and professional brand. Today, we are sitting here with Dianna Klein, who is a 787 pilot with a major airline, an entrepreneur, a veteran, and recently titled Mrs. Nevada American 2020. This influencer plays many roles which positively help the community. Let's hear how she does that and how she manages all her hats, using her crown and sash to give back to the community, which is also the premise of why she chose to develop her social media presence. Welcome, Dianna. Dianna, thank you so much for joining us on Under the Influencers with the Sky Pirates. We appreciate you being on the show and on this podcast, as busy as you are with many of your hats and roles you play in your life.
Oh, absolutely love it. It's my pleasure. Thank you for asking me, and thanks for reaching out.
Hey, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I am a pilot for a major U.S. airline, and I fly the 787 Dreamliner based out of San Francisco, and that's what pays the bills. And then other than that, when I come home, I am a full-time mom to two young boys, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. Also a wife of almost 16 years. It'll be 16 years, December 31st. So New Year's Eve. To my husband, Mark, who is also a pilot for a major U.S. airline. So we both have that in common. We never run out of things to talk about. But that is work and family in brief. And then one of my passions is giving back. I'm lucky with my airline schedule, especially pre-COVID. I had only worked 9 days a month because I did long haul international, which gave me a lot of time at home with the boys and with Mark. And then also it gave me a lot of time to give back to my community. And that's been a passion of mine. It was in high school. I did a lot of community service in high school. And then, as you know, you start down the career path and life gets busy and you get so focused on that career that you kind of let other things fall off. And one of the things that fell off my plate was my community service, and it was something that my parents instilled in me in a young age. And when you have the ability or the means to give back, you always give back. And building my airline career, I wasn't able to give back very much, and so I finally have arrived at a point in life to give back, and I'm very active in the addiction community and helping support those in recovery, and mostly helping them feel that they are loved and that they are surrounded by people who care about them once they get to that recovery phase. We all make mistakes in life, we all fall short, and I think the addiction community does unfortunately get hammered quite a bit by society, and I don't believe they deserve that. So try to wrap loving arms around them and let them know that they are welcomed back into our society. And the more involved I've become in that, the more I've found that addiction and human trafficking and homelessness, all three of those things, all three of those links in that awful chain, feed off one another. So I found myself becoming very involved in the human trafficking situation here in Las Vegas. Vegas, good and bad. Good, it's a major metropolitan hub for the West. We have McCarran Airport, which services more cities in the country than any other airport, has more direct flights per day than any other airport, pre-pandemic and current pandemic, both. And then also we have two major highway systems, one going north and south, and basically one going east and west, that allow for a lot of infrastructure and a lot of business to be moved, which is good. But then the negative and dark side of that is we're also a human trafficking hub. So we have a lot of that here in Vegas. It's a major problem. So I'm working with the Shiro Foundation as well as some other organizations to help rescue women, young girls, and young boys out of those situations, get them started on the right foot again in life, and get them away from that negative environment and those trying to pull them in. So that's what I do in my spare time.
All right, Dianna, so you started off as a pilot. Tell us about your career as a pilot. I guess it started not at a major airline, but before then, right? Way before then, when you were a little girl, right?
Way before, yes. So my dad was a pilot for United, and he started there in 1964. So back on the DC-6 as an engineer. and then retired in 2003. So he spent almost 40 years at United. So big, big, long career. And I grew up in Winchester, Virginia, which is, as the crow flies, about 60 miles due west of Washington, D.C. So he was a Washington, D.C. based pilot for United all of those years. And Dad always came home with a big smile on his face, no matter how long the trip was, no matter how many legs a day he had. He always came home with a big smile on his face, and he wanted to spend time with me. And I thought, okay, I saw this growing up. I'm like, well, that seems like a really fun job. I want to have a family and I want to spend time with my family, but I want to do something cool and fun for a living. So this airline pilot thing seems pretty neat. So I started asking Dad a lot about it, as, you know, those little kid questions. And whenever he would come home, I would always follow him up the stairs and help him unpack his bag and talk to him about his trips and the people he flew with and the experiences he had. And so I caught the bug early, and he never, ever pushed me ever into it. He just encouraged me once he realized that I was interested. He encouraged me and kind of led me down the right direction, because, as I know you've heard, there's so many ways to get lost along that aviation career path. And I feel very blessed and fortunate to have had my dad there to bounce ideas off of and to make sure that I stayed on the right course through high school, college, and even beyond. But with that, I started taking lessons at a really young age from my dad. He went ahead, and it's funny how the math works in flight training. It's actually cheaper, if you're serious about it, to buy a cheap small aircraft and then hire an instructor to teach you, which seems counterintuitive, but that is indeed the economics behind it. It's a lot more affordable. So,
and for everybody out there who is not in the aviation field and now is looking at, you know, into the career, into the industry, that's a big tip right there. Thanks, Dianna.
oh yeah, definitely. Well, it's counterintuitive. And you think that a lot of people think that you have to be super duper wealthy to own an airplane, and you really don't. I mean, you can buy a very simple 152 or 172 out there for the same cost as a Honda Civic, or even less. And it's really, if you're going to go through all of your ratings, private, instrument, commercial, CFI, it is cheaper to buy your own aircraft and then hire an instructor and do it that way. And then it's also fun too. You can build flight time at your leisure with your own airplane. You don't have to go and rent aircraft. And so overall, the economics behind it is just so much cheaper, so much more affordable. So that's what my dad did. He went out and bought a 172, and then we even pinched pennies even more because he was my instructor too. So he would come home on his days off from flying big jets, the 777. He was a 777 captain at the time when he was teaching me to fly, and in high school, and he would come home on his days off and, you know, go from that PhD level airline captain stuff to private pilot level with me in high school. And it was fun. We had a blast. He was my instructor all the way through my very first rating, which is the private pilot certificate. He turned me over to the flight school there at Winchester just to polish me off for a few flights to make sure that he's like, I just want to make sure I did everything right with you before I send you for a check ride. So he did that, and went for my check ride and passed. So it was really fun to have my dad solo me, and then take me through that first rating. So yes, I started in high school, got my private in high school, and then Dad said, okay, I'm going to turn you over to a real instructor for the instrument to make sure you get everything covered that you need to cover. So I had a regular instructor for my instrument out at Winchester in my dad's small plane too. So still saving quite a bit of money there, and was able to acquire that rating before I went to college, and had those under my belt, which was handy. Went to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach, Florida. Big aviation and engineering school. And yes, it is a 4-year college. A lot of people ask if it's a tech school, and it's not. We had all of the traditional classes, the Englishes, the histories, the well-rounded education, in addition to all of our aviation courses and science courses. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in aeronautical science, which included my commercial rating, my CFI, my multi-engine commercial rating, as well as all of those normal college classes, and then a lot of aerodynamics, physics, mathematics, all of those science courses too, that help us further understand why airplanes fly and how they do what they do. But that was a blast. I hustled through college. I finished in 3 years. Love, as you know, United declared bankruptcy post 9/11. I graduated college in 2003. Originally, it was going to be 2004. And I remember a conversation I had with my dad shortly after, the trauma of 9/11, and, the direction that United was going at the time was not good. And he said, we're probably okay as far as getting you through the rest of college. He said, but if you can help us out in any way, we would appreciate it. And I saluted smartly and said, yes, sir, and kind of picked up on his subtle hints. And I put my nose to the grindstone, finished in 3 years. I applied for a program called the Flight Fellowship and Leadership Program at Embry-Riddle, which was an accelerated program to get me through my CFI, my Certified Flight Instructor rating. And it accelerated us through that. And then we were guaranteed an interview to fly for Embry-Riddle and instruct for Embry-Riddle. Not guaranteed the job, but guaranteed the interview. So got the job through the interview, fortunately, was paid through that. And as part of that program, part of our college classes were also comped as well. So between that, yeah, I was very lucky, very fortunate. Also, my room and board was paid for as well. I was a resident advisor through those years. And then I did some internships, one with Continental Airlines back in the summer of 2002. Got a lot of college credit through that, but even more importantly, more important than the college credit was just the experience I gained from being engrossed in flight operations and seeing how things work on the back end. There's over 250 people that touch an airplane, if you will, either directly or indirectly to get it off the gate. It's not just we pilots and flight attendants, it's so many people, such a team of experts behind the scenes. And I got to see that at a very young age of 20 when I was an intern. And it really gave me a tremendous perspective on my career and then the industry as a whole. So that was super valuable. But those things combined, the internship, the flight fellowship program, I stayed summers, which were more affordable tuition wise, and I cranked through college in 3 years and finished in that time. And in a way that was a blessing in disguise. It opened up an extra year to me to kind of figure out my way, because after 9/11, not a lot of options. And one of those things that I really had a passion to do was serve my country. Back in high school, I made every effort to get into the Air Force Academy that I could. And I took the SAT 4 different times, and there was a certain threshold. I believe it was a 1400, 14 or 1500. I can't exactly remember. But what I do remember is I narrowly missed that threshold every single time. And in order to get a congressional nomination in Virginia at the time, you had to meet that bare bones minimum SAT score that they required. And I couldn't get there. And I was devastated. I'm like, oh, thankfully Dad was there. And he said, well, it's not the end of the world. I fly with a lot of guys and gals that fly for United, and then they also fly in the Air Force Reserve or the Air National Guard. So let's crank you through a normal college experience. If you still have that passion to serve your country after you have your college degree, then we'll look at the Air National Guard and Air Force Reserve. And that was still the case, especially after 9/11. That even further solidified my desire to do what I do best, and that's fly airplanes for my country and in the defense of my country. And that's what I pursued after college. At the time, being that type A personality, I had my future all planned out. I was going to live in the Northeast. I was specifically going to marry my college sweetheart. We were going to live in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, close to Mom and Dad. I was eventually going to get hired at United Airlines and fly out of Dulles and Reagan and BWI. And oh, by the way, I'm going to have this really cool Air Force Reserve gig in Andrews, Dover, Martinsburg, McGuire, somewhere in that area. I had it all planned out. And of course, all that went out the window. I did eventually wind up at United, and I did eventually wind up with a really cool Air Force gig, but the rest of it the locations and relationships fell away. So that being said, I was focused on the Northeast. I applied with the Guard or Reserve. You actually apply to the squadrons themselves. You pick the squadrons that you want to apply to. And then you rush the squadron is what we say, kind of like a sorority or a fraternity rush, except not as intense. I had a book, and I don't even know if it's still published, but at the time it was published by Air Inc., and it was called A Civilian's Guide to Flying in the Guard and Reserve. And it had every Guard and Reserve unit of any branch of service, not just Air Force and Air National Guard, but it had every single one, Marine Corps, Navy, Army, everything, big, thick book. With a contact number and name and location and basic information about each one. So I went through and I marked every single one on the East Coast. That was Air Force and either Air National Guard or Air Force Reserve. And as soon as I had them all marked, I started picking up the phone and cold calling saying, hey, this is Dianna Hoover at the time, here's who I am, here's my brief, 30-second spiel of a resume, and I'd love to fly for you guys. What do I need to do? And I knew no one. I knew no one at these squadrons. And Dover and Andrews were the most receptive, and because they currently were in between activations, because 9/11, everybody, all the squadrons were activated, people were actively flying. A lot of squadrons I called, I would get an admin, usually a civilian admin that was left over at the squadron to keep the lights on while the rest of the pilots and other operators were out in the desert fighting the war. And their response was, we'll get back to you in a few months. But Dover and Andrews were both very receptive. I went to both squadrons during a drill weekend, got to meet everyone. And Dover called first. Both hired me, but Dover called first, and I chose Dover and went and got in the pipeline for Dover, if you will. Takes a little bit longer as a pilot to get started in the Guard or Reserve. If you want to go active duty, a little bit easier, especially now. There's a shortage of pilots in the military. Even with the pandemic, there's still a shortage. So active duty wise, it's a little easier to get in, but active duty comes with a lot more strings attached. Whereas the Guard and Reserve, you can be that Air Force pilot, but then you can also have your civilian career. And that's the two, those are the things that I wanted. That was my vision for my career. I wanted both. A lot of people don't want to do that, totally fine. A lot of people just want to go active duty, and then a lot of people just want to do the civilian airline thing, and nothing wrong with that. It's just a personal life choice. So that being said, it took a little while for my class dates to come up. So my officer training class, my pilot training class. I was also young because I did graduate that year early. And my squadron said, hey, congratulations, we want you. But because you were so young and because things are a bit tumultuous right now with 9/11 and the war, maybe a while before we get to you. And I said, okay, no problem. So in the meantime, I kept flight instructing, and I was flying Part 135 corporate charter in a King Air C90, and just plugging away, and still had my applications out at the airlines. And was very fortunate. I got picked up by American Eagle at the time. Went through training, flew the ERJ, the Embraer 145 out of LaGuardia for them, had a blast, and was doing that for several months, and that was going great. And then the phone rang, and it was my squadron at Dover, and they said, hey, sorry it's been so long, but are you still interested? And I said, absolutely, yes. So I took military leave from American Eagle. They were really great to me. Took leave from them for about 3 years and went to officer training school and commissioned as a second lieutenant. Right after that, I went to undergraduate pilot training at Vance Air Force Base, Oklahoma, Enid, Oklahoma, for a year. And that was an absolute blast. Made some great friends that I still keep in touch with to this day. Did some amazing flying. I felt like I was a pretty good stick, a pretty good pilot going into pilot training. I had about 3,000 hours. I had a lot more experience under my belt than a lot of my classmates that just came straight out of the Air Force Academy or officer training school. But at the same time, my flying ability just exponentially increased after that year. I cannot say enough good things about military pilot training. It was awesome, awesome, awesome. Great people. Great training. So glad I did it. But did that for a year. And then after that year of pilot training, I went to type specific school. So I went and flew C5 Galaxies. I was hired to fly the C5. And I went to type specific school at Altus Air Force Base, Oklahoma, way out in the middle of not a lot in Oklahoma, but a lot of really nice people out in Oklahoma. I love that state. After spending a year in pilot training in Enid and then another 4 months at Altus, like really just fell in love with Oklahoma and the people, really good people. But did that, and then went through survival school up at Fairchild Air Force Base in Spokane, Washington. And let's see, that was about, a total of about 3, actually closer to a month, because we did outdoor survival and then we did water survival, which was, I like to call that the best training I never want to go through again. Very, very glad I did it, but it was tough. It was tough, but it was invaluable information to have. And I feel 100% comfortable going out in the wilderness with minimal equipment, knowing that I'll be able to survive at least a few days until some people come to find me. So
Right.
based on that training. But after that, I went back to my squadron and I was on what we call an active duty set of orders. So I was full time, even though I was in the reserves, I was full time to basically have IOE, initial operating experience. We called it seasoning, just to get used to the mission, get used to how the Air Force operates, get used to the C5. And so, yeah, I was finishing that up. I still had all my applications in at the major airlines, because even though I felt like I was lower time at the time, with the environment being as competitive as it was, you never know. You're not going to get hired unless you apply.
Right.
So I had apps in everywhere, had apps in at United, Continental, American, I mean, Delta, everybody. And Continental called and they said, "Hey, are you interested in an interview?" I said, "Absolutely, yes." And so was interviewed by Continental in July, was hired, started there in August of 2007. And the rest is history. I was at my squadron at the time, finishing up a set of active duty orders when I got hired at Continental. So that worked out really well. I was very lucky to just go from active duty to Continental, and still flew for the reserves and Air National Guard. I transitioned to the Guard later because my reserve squadron went C-17s, which is an amazing aircraft, super great, super fun,
Wow.
very intense though, and having the airline job and then trying to maintain the currency and do both well, I felt like I would not be able to do that. So I bid my first squadron adieu and went and flew for the West Virginia Air National Guard out of Martinsburg, West Virginia, and flew C5s for them. So, and did both for many years and loved it. And again, priceless. I can't say enough good about my military experience and the people that I met.
How amazing. What an amazing story. Just the transition and how flawless it may sound, but I
So,
can't imagine what you went through, with every step and direction you thought you had in your mind all planned out, but then just how it just seems so seamless. But I know it wasn't.
no, it definitely wasn't. Yeah, I feel like, even as I'm sitting here telling you, giving you the overview, I'm like, oh gosh, like things are popping up in my brain. Go, okay,
Yeah.
and this happened and this happened. I mean, it sounds seamless when I give you the high level overview, but it definitely wasn't. There was a lot of roadblocks along the way. I was really, really fortunate. I got married very young to my husband. We've been married 16 years now at the end of this month, and we were married at 22 and 23. So he followed me, and I should say I drug him through my career building mud for all those years. And he did enough. He did it to me too. We worked really well as a team. He currently is a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force Reserves at Nellis, as well as a pilot for Delta. So he was building his career same time I was building my career, but we both really supported each other. And he was a huge asset to me going through my Air Force Reserve portion of my career.
When did you meet your husband?
So Mark and I met in college, and he's a year older than me. So he was a sophomore when I was
Okay.
a freshman. And bless his heart, he asked me out like twice, and I turned him down twice, like the first 2 times during the first year of my college career, because I went to Embry-Riddle with my nose to the grindstone, knowing and having my dad in the industry. My dad was like, "Look, go to college, get done, get through it, get a seniority number. That is your mission."
Right.
And I was like, "Okay, Dad, sure." And that's what I'm going to go do. So I didn't have time for distractions. I didn't want to deal with any boys. I just wanted to focus on school. Poor Mark, I turned him down twice, and our circles of friends still kind of would collide on occasion throughout college. And I kind of watched him go through his ROTC career. And he watched me kind of go through my flight instructing and eating top ramen and saving money and penny pinching part in college as well. And then our senior year, we had a class together. And he always sat beside me. And that senior year for me was pretty intense because I took classes Tuesdays and Thursdays all day from 8 o'clock in the morning until about 5 o'clock at night with minimal breaks in between, just enough to transit class. And then Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I flight instructed from 6 a.m. until as long as I could, as long as was legal, as many hours as I could get in. So oftentimes, and even on those Tuesday, Thursdays, if I had students that needed to be finished up, but we would have the 6 a.m. flight block and go and fly for an hour and a half. And then I would hustle over to class at 8 a.m. So a lot of times I would show up in my flight instructor uniform and kind of tired. And so he was in that class that we had together and always kind of kept it lively and kept me awake. And so he mustered up the courage again to ask me out again, and I finally acquiesced, and I said, okay, fine, sure. And so that was our senior year, and that was towards the tail end. And so we dated just briefly towards the tail end of the senior year, and I thought, okay, he's going to go his way and Air Force career, and I'm going to go my way, and this was nice, but good luck and Godspeed. And he had different plans. So he wanted to hang on to me as long as possible. So we did the long distance dating for about a year, and then we were engaged for a year and then married. So yeah, that's
amazing. What a wonderful story.
I fully did not intend on getting my MRS out of college. I was 100% there to get my BS degree and get my experience and start my career, but nope. He had different plans. So
yeah, that's awesome. What a great way to connect. And then now years later, decades later, you guys, how many, I guess that would have been not almost 2 decades, or almost 2 decades, right?
Yeah, actually, yes. Come to think of it, over let's see, 20 years. 2000, fall of 2000 is when I met him.
2000. Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah, and just be and so does he work for the same airline, or?
He doesn't. No.
He doesn't.
No.
Okay. And then, so how does that work? I mean, I know how it works, but how does it work for those out there? How does it work being two pilots at two different major airlines and having a family and balancing it all?
Yes, that's a great question. And sometimes I feel like we have it wired, and then other times I just feel like an epic fail. And I think one thing, as a mother, I think all mothers, no matter if they are stay-at-home professionals, if they're professional homemakers, who I seriously admire, because little segue here, but after both my boys were born, my first son, I took a year and a half off completely after he was born. And my second son, I felt like I had, had the mommy thing wired a little better. So I only took about 7 months off after Caleb was born, my second. But both of those times, especially the first time with my first son, Mason, I had all these plans of things I was going to get done on my maternity leave. Like I was going to cross stitch and do some of these crafty things, because I would have all of this free time, like all of my stay-at-home mom friends had, or at least I thought they had. Love, I have never worked so hard in my life than when I was a stay-at-home mom for that year and a half with my first son, and then the 8 months after my second son. When Caleb came around, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to have any time whatsoever except for taking care of children. The second time I took maternity leave. But a huge shout out to those stay-at-home moms out there, and to anyone who's listening who doesn't understand what that is like, hasn't experienced it, or if you're a father out there and you scratch your head as to why you might come home from a 4-day trip, if you're a pilot and your house is a disaster and your wife is a stay-at-home mom and you wonder why, it's because she is probably more busy and doing a lot more than you have been doing for the past 4 days. So huge shout out to the stay-at-home moms. But how do we do it? So that was part of it. We had been married 13 years before we had kids, and I had been so career focused that I wanted to make sure I could really shift gears and do the mommy thing well, which is why I took that time off. And so Mark came in and worked even more after that, picked up trips. You know how that works. He put a little more effort into it to make up for the financial shortfall. With both. And then when we did first get married, we wanted a family, and we were talking about how we'd make that work. And different options were thrown around, nannies, au pairs, all kinds of childcare options. were discussed. And then every chance I had that I ran into a fellow female pilot that had children, I would pick her brain. Okay, what do you do? You know, what is, and the common theme that they all told me was, here's what I do, but you're going to have to figure out your own solution. And you're going to wind up taking bits and pieces from my plan, and then bits and pieces from Susie's plan, and bits and pieces from Elizabeth's plan, you know, different plans to formulate your own. And that is indeed what happened. So what we do is, we are really, really lucky. My mother-in-law, who I get along great with, she is a retired high school teacher and principal.
Yay, that's awesome.
And my husband is the youngest of three boys. So she raised three very successful men. I like to joke around with them and say, all three of you have remained out of any correctional facility. So your mom and dad did great. But she's very adventurous. She's single. And I brought her up to my husband. I said, well, what about your mom? At the time when we were having this discussion, she was getting ready to retire. She hadn't retired yet. And he goes, well, let me ask her. And so we pitched it to her, and she goes, yes, I'm interested. Keep me posted on your progress, meaning the Project Baby progress.
Right.
And so we did. And when I became pregnant, we circled back with her and said, hey, no pressure if your plans have changed, no worries, but we want to give you first dibs at this job. And oh, by the way, we don't know where we're going to be living or what life looks like, but if you want to come along on this journey with us, we'd like to welcome you along. And so she said yes. And she's been such a blessing. She's been living with us now for 3 years. We have a main house, and then we have a smaller, we call it a casita. So it's a separate mother-in-law suite. A lot of people use casitas as a, you know, workout area or a separate office, but we have a grandma living in our casita, which is really great.
What a blessing.
We're
That
so
is,
lucky. So lucky.
as a mother, like, it makes a world of a difference having an extra pair of hands, you know, so good for you. That's
Yeah,
great.
and she is definitely that. And even we kept her, and the way a lot of people ask, they're like, well, how do you pay her? How does that work? We keep it all in the up and up. We work through care.com. Care.com has not to give them a shameless plug here, but they've done a great job for us. But they have a program where they will actually pull the money out of whichever account you want and put it into her account, and they do all the tax paperwork, the W-2s, all of those things for us. So she is an employee.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's a great solution in itself, right there.
Yes.
And as far as your other journeys, which we're going to tap into it in a second, how has Mark played a role in that, in all your other endeavors?
So he's so supportive, and when I was in college, I was busy. I was always doing stuff. And so I give him a hard time sometimes. I'm like, well, that hasn't changed. Like the things, the busy has stayed the same. The endeavors have changed, but you kind of knew what you were getting into. And he's like, yep, I sure did. You know, any way I can support you. He's like, I want to be there to support you. And he really has. One of the things I did when I was on maternity leave with my first son is I really felt an urge to go back and get a master's degree, get an MBA. I did a little stint in management at my major US airline, and I loved it, met a lot of great people, had a lot of great experiences, experienced some things that I didn't understand or didn't agree with, and it kind of spurned a desire in me to go learn more, to see if, you know, those things I didn't understand, could I then understand them with some more education, and those things that I didn't like, would I grow to like them once I understood why they were implemented, or why things are the way they are in corporate America and in a major corporation business wise. So I was very lucky. We did not plan this, but my pregnancy just happened to coincide with the same footprint as the University of Nevada, Las Vegas's executive MBA program landed. So
Nice.
I applied, I got in. I started in May of 2016. I gave birth to Mason in July of 2016. And 4 days after I gave birth, I was retaking my final exams in microeconomics. and accounting, financial accounting. And I remember going in 4 days after giving birth, and both my professors were amazing. They're like, we can let you take these exams at home and we'll proctor
Right.
them through Skype or through Zoom or whatever. I'm like, no, my classmates had to go in, I'm going to go in. And I did for one of them. The other one I stayed home, but for my one exam I did go in. I remember sitting there and I'm writing, it was an essay style exam. I'm writing out my essays in this booklet. And I look over at my left arm and I still have IV tape on my arm from
That's amazing.
I'm like, what am I doing? Like, this is insane. But my class was great. My professors were awesome. I can't say enough good about that program. Met a lot of really great people, learned a lot. But where does Mark's role, I'm telling you this because getting back to your original question of where does Mark come in, like he was a huge help during that time as far as watching Mason and helping, just helping out while I had to stay up sometimes all night to get papers written. He would take over baby duty and just was such a wingman, such a supporter during that time. So he's also, I must say, he's a very fancy arm piece to go to different events and different things with. He has the gift of gab. People really like talking to him. He's very friendly, he's very approachable, and he's just a really great partner in crime for everything.
Aww. Okay, so tell me, how does he feel about this upcoming contest?
Oh,
Tell everybody about this contest and how to get
oh,
involved. And
yes, I definitely will. Yeah, everybody's fascinated by the whole juxtaposition, if you will, of airline pilot, entrepreneur, and now beauty queen. So I am currently the reigning Mrs. Nevada American 2020. And I delved into the pageant world right after my son Mason was born. Mason was born in 2016, and I was having lunch with a very dear girlfriend. We were both serving on the American Cancer Society's Young Professionals Board here in Southern Nevada. And we were planning a fundraiser. And Amanda, my friend, and I wanted to get together for lunch. And so to help plan this fundraiser. So we did. And I brought Mason with me, and all the accoutrement that you bring with a baby. Bring Mason and diaper bag and stroller and the whole entourage and me to lunch. And I sit down, and Amanda and I start talking, and we talk about the fundraiser, and we do what we need to do for that. And then we start talking about life and how things were going as being a new mom. And I said, well, honestly, I have some pesky weight that I cannot get off. And I've tried running, I've tried doing everything I can. And I said, I'm motivated by a goal and by having something to shoot for, and being the cheap pilot that I am. If I pay an entry fee for something that's non-refundable, then gosh darn it, you better believe I'm gonna finish it. I'm gonna get there, whether it's a marathon or whatever it may be. And I had run 2 marathons before. One of my goals on my bucket list was to do the Marine Corps Marathon and the Air Force Marathon. So I had done those. Glad I did. Not really interested in doing another marathon. I told Amanda this. And so we're brainstorming different things that I could do. And she goes, you know what? She goes, you should do a beauty pageant. I'm like, what? And I kind of like turn around, like, is she talking to me? I'm like, yeah, I'm like, me? I said, I'm married. Like, beauty pageants are not for married women. They're the Miss Americas and the Miss Universes, not for we married ladies. She goes, oh, no. She goes, oh no, there's a whole nother division and a whole nother world of it. And she goes, I really think you would enjoy it. And she said, it'll give you that goal that you're looking for. Mm-hmm. And I think you should think about it. She's like, I'm competing in one this year. You should do it with me. And I laughed. I'm like, no. And so we continued on with lunch, and we parted ways. On driving home, I still kept thinking about it. And a few days after, I still kept thinking about this beauty pageant thing. I Googled some stuff and went to the Mrs. Nevada America website and looked at it. And I'm like, this is really interesting. And love, like, after I wore combat boots and a Nomex flight suit for 9 years. And you've seen our airline uniforms. I mean, now, fortunately, at our major US airline, there's some good options for ladies, but that hasn't always been the case. Mm-hmm. So I felt like I've been wearing boys' clothes and dressing like a boy my entire adult life. And I personally felt like I could improve on some of those more finer points, those girly things, if you will. And so after a few days, I pitched it to Mark. I'm like, hey, Amanda brought this up. And I think it's a little crazy, but at the same time, I think it's something that I feel like I could really grow with. And it also coincided not only with the personal growth and polishing of the tomboy, if you will, uh,
Uh-huh.
but one big thing about pageantry that a lot of people don't understand is there is a huge component of it. In fact, the majority component is your community service platform. And how are you getting out into the community to effectuate change and make it a better place when you leave this world someday? Like, what are you doing to help your fellow man? And that's the part of pageantry that I love, is it's a bunch of women who, yes, there is a competition, and yes, there is a appearance aspect of it, but you don't have that without the community service portion. And it's one thing I've gained from it is a community of women who are just absolutely passionate about what we are doing in our world and what we can do to help. And that's the part I didn't fully realize until I got into it. So back to pitching it to Mark, I brought that into it. I said, I'm already interested in doing a lot in the community. This would really help and augment, and it would essentially run in concurrence with everything else that I'm doing. It would not be an addition to, it would not be an or, it would be an and. So it would tie in very well in my life. I wouldn't be giving something up to do it. And he goes, well, honey, he's like, and I'm paraphrasing here because I was a little taken aback when he said it to me. He goes, you really could probably use a little polishing and a little help. And I'm like, oh, ouch. Okay. There's that. I'm like, all right, done. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. So, and I did, and I had no idea what I was doing when I was competing. I competed in 2018. In April of 2018, the first time with my friend Amanda. She finished first runner up. I finished fourth runner up, which is a fancy word for fifth place. And I was stoked. I was ecstatic. I'm like, wow, I actually placed, because the ladies that placed ahead of me were either pageant veterans, fitness models. I mean, just very accomplished women and very accomplished entrepreneurs. We all had resumes the length of War and Peace. It was really an impressive group of women and ladies to be around. So I took a year off. I gave birth to my second son, and then I also lost my mom in the fall of 2018. So there was a lot going on in life, and I took 2019 off, and I started to get that itch to compete again. And the pageant director, Jackie McKenna, a great lady, she had reached out to me and said, hey, just, wondering what you're up to and checking on you. And the currently reigning Mrs. America, Natalie Winslow, who was a former Mrs. Nevada, has become a dear friend. And she kind of reached out to me and said, hey, same line of questioning, what you up to? And I thought, well, okay, I'm going to compete again. I'm going to give it another try. And I did. I competed in August of this year and won the title of Mrs. Nevada American. And we were supposed to have our national competition where I would compete against my fellow state title holders from across the country in January. And because of COVID-19, that's been postponed to March. So March 19th through the 27th. At the Westgate Hotel here in Las Vegas. So it's kind of nice. I don't have, unlike all the rest of the poor ladies I'm competing with, they have to bring their entire wardrobe via aircraft. I can fortunately just throw it in the back of my car and drive down to the Strip, which is very nice. But it's been a lot of fun. I just cannot emphasize how much we call it the sisterhood, which sounds a little bit corny to those who don't understand, but it really and truly is a sisterhood. If I need something, I call one of these ladies and they're right there. If we are doing any kind of community service related project, we've got a whole team that is fully on board supporting one another. Even the ladies I competed, a lot of people think, okay, you're being judged and you're competing against. That's not how we saw it. We were competing with each other, meaning we were developing our own personal best and putting it on stage and putting it out in front of the judges during the interviews. And we're competing against ourselves, not against the other people, other ladies, and really gained a lot of friendships from the whole process.
That's great. Yeah, I had a lot of questions about that competition wise, because I'm a firm believer in competing against myself, my former self, yesterday's love, and one of the things I was going to ask you was, who was your fiercest competitor? Would that be you, or would that be somebody that you idolized there? that you've met that just has it put together naturally, as opposed to having to learn that part for you?
Yes.
Um,
Oh, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked. I mean, yes, yes, you are your own greatest competitor, but the one lady that I look to the most through the whole process, because it's kind of a campaign. Like if you're thinking about running for office, like this is actually good practice, because your social media and presenting yourself and being able to articulate your platform and talk about the pageant and talk about your passions and talk about your family, like being able to represent yourself the best is a skill that I think everyone should develop. And this has definitely helped me develop that skill. But one of the ladies who I look to often, I would be like, oh, she just did that. That's awesome. Good for her. I wish I had thought of that. Was Jenny Runke, and she was actually my first runner-up. And Jenny is amazing. She is a active duty maintenance officer. She was deployed, I think, for 9 months right before the pageant. So she prepped for everything while she was at her deployed location, came back to the States, was here maybe 2 or 3 months, and then jumped right in. And this is the pageant prep process is not just 2 to 3 months. It's usually about a year to get everything set. So Jenny did all of this remotely. She's gorgeous. She's very fit. That is one thing in pageantry. You don't have to be the prettiest person, but you do have to be physically fit just for health reasons. And even that being said, I am not the smallest person either. So you don't have to be a stick figure, but Jenny fits everything. She's in great shape. She's brilliant. She went to the Air Force Academy. She's a maintenance officer on the fast track. She pins on major, I believe, in January. And to top it all off, she's the mother of 5 children, and she
wow.
keeps it all together. So I wouldn't say I compared myself to her the most, but she's probably out of all the ladies, like she was the one I looked to as, wow, she's someone I aspire to be like in many areas of life. So, and I consider her a dear friend to this day.
That's amazing. I love how you mentioned just the sisterhood, because a lot of people think that pageants are it is a competition, but it's a competition within yourself, but a lot of people, maybe it's because of what they see on TV, they think that
Oh,
that competition is brutal, and it's a little petty, but just hearing you say that, for those out there who think pageantry is somewhat silly, it's a lot. There's a lot of mental, you have to have a great mental capacity, psychological capacity, spiritual capacity. I mean, you really do have to have it together. You have to be strong to compete. And what better way than to meet a whole bunch of other people who are doing the same thing, who have the same capacity as you, who are giving back to the community, and in their, using their outlook on life as well as their background and experience to provide that social advocacy, to help the world, you know. Philanthropy, I mean, for me, philanthropy is number one. I mean, you have to give back. People gave back for you to be here,
absolutely.
and so you have to give back. With that said, can we please talk about some of the organizations that you're involved with?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the organizations that ties in very closely to my platform, which is called Take Flight to Fight the Opioid Epidemic, is Freedom House. Freedom House is a facility here in Las Vegas that provides the 28-day rehabilitation program to those who have experienced homelessness for free. What a lot of people don't understand is the 28-day rehab program is very, very expensive. And more and more insurance companies are covering the cost, but still a lot of private insurance companies are not covering that cost. And there's a facet of our community, specifically the homeless facet, that obviously does not have access to insurance and access to the means to attend that private rehab that we stereotypically see in the media. So Freedom House, it's run by Freedom Behavioral Health, which is a nonprofit here in Las Vegas. They have a facility in downtown Vegas that has up to 30 capacity for up to 30 residents. And even with the pandemic, they have put in bunk beds and they've increased their capacity even more so, because one of the unfortunate fallouts of the lockdown and of the lack of resources created by that is more individuals needing to come into those types of programs. More people are homeless, more people are becoming more addicted to substances, and they need those programs even more. But Freedom House specifically targets men, and they specifically target homeless men that have been homeless for an extended period of time. Here in Las Vegas, a lot of people don't see it when they just fly in and go to the Strip, but we are actually in a bowl. We're in a valley. So when it rains in the valley, it floods, and all the water comes from the mountains and into the Las Vegas Valley. So as such, we have a very extensive draining system underneath the city of tunnels. Now, most days out of the year, those tunnels are bone dry. We are in the middle of the Mojave, but during our monsoon season, which is actually right now, a lot of rain. And when it floods, it really floods. So during the rest of the month or rest of the year, those tunnels are actually inhabited by a very large homeless population. One of the figures that I heard was there was by proper statistical recordings, 8,000 in the tunnels, but realistically, probably closer to 15 to 20 in the tunnels. It's an entire community. They have an entire structure of rank and file and protocols. And most of those individuals experiencing homelessness in the tunnels of Las Vegas also have narcotics addiction issues, specifically opioids. Mm-hmm. So what Freedom House does is they actually go down, they take teams down, and they offer to help these individuals. Many are not receptive. Many will take a card or will take some assistance as far as water and food that those individuals, those volunteers bring. And then oftentimes what happens is they finally realize, okay, I do need to get out of this situation. They pull out the card and then they find their way to Freedom House, either via a phone call to a volunteer, or they know where it is and they find themselves on the doorstep. So Freedom House is funded by different foundations here in town, and then also through donations of private donors. And one of the issues that they had during the lockdown is a large portion of their food was through food rescue from the casinos. So the various casinos on the Strip will take the leftover buffet food, the leftover convention food, keep it very sanitary and package it very nicely and load it onto refrigerator trucks. And those trucks would deliver that food to various nonprofits in town that feed the homeless. And one of those nonprofits happened to be Freedom House. About 60% of Freedom House's food to feed their residents came from rescued food from the casinos. So during the lockdown, when the casinos shut down, they lost 60% of their food. So a really dear friend of mine is the executive director, and I reached out to him and I said, what can I do? I'm a layperson, but what can I do? And he goes, we really need food. He goes, if there's a way that you can figure out to get food to us, we would take any and all that you can get. And I said, okay. So I started a grassroots campaign called Feed Freedom House Fuel Recovery. And it was a bunch of people in the Las Vegas community fixing meals, anything that they could, either fixing meals, providing snacks, anything edible or drinkable that of course is non-alcoholic, but anything, any food or beverage that they could provide. I was going around town and picking up those food donations and then driving them to Freedom House. And it was really cool because, you know, again, I wasn't flying very much, and nor was my husband. So Mark and I would both tag team this. Like I set up an online form where people can sign up to deliver food, send me your address, I will come and pick it up. We did contactless pickup, so people would put it out on their doorstep, I would pick it up. I even have photos of families waving at me through their windows as I'm picking up the food. Same thing at Freedom House, I would drop it off, I would ring the doorbell, the guys would come and get it, and I got to meet some really incredible people and really hear some awesome stories through the windows and through through hollering 6 feet away from one another, hearing their stories and hearing how grateful they were for feeling that love from the community, saying, hey, you guys still matter, we care about you, and we want you to get through this and back to us as soon as possible. So Mark and I wound up running that campaign for about 3.5 months and getting food to Freedom House. So Right now, thankfully, they were able to fill that void and find another supplier to fill that 60% void. The casinos are back up and running, but not near to the capacity food-wise and convention-wise. So the food rescue is not there. But thankfully, they were able to figure out a more solid food source than just, thankfully, me picking up meals and bringing them. Uh, but in the meantime, I'm helping advocate for them and letting people know that they exist and know that they're there. I know myself, before I became aware of Freedom House, I wasn't aware that there was addiction recovery facilities and avenues for people, for homeless individuals to go to. So now I'm just trying to spread the word and post as much as possible via social media and my website to educate people like you and I about these opportunities to serve and opportunities to donate to help a great cause.
It's amazing. So is that how you get a lot of the families who, is it through your social media that you're able to receive families and their donations and their, just, I guess, their love?
Yes, yes. And it was
Wow.
really amazing to see because a lot of it was my own personal network here in Vegas, a
Mhm.
lot of those folks. And then my personal network reached out to their networks. And we actually had monetary donations coming in from across the
That's great.
country
Wow.
directly to Freedom House. So we estimate, my friend Paul and I, Paul is the executive director of Freedom House, he and I estimate that from that, and it's hard to delineate the money. I wanted the money to go directly to Freedom House and not go through me because donations and accountability and accounting wise,
Sure.
financial wise. But during that time span, we raised about $5,000. And I'd like to think a lot of that was from my efforts. We're not sure, we can't delineate which donations were from my people and
Sure.
from regular donors who, donate normally to Freedom House. But yes, we had, through my network and through my social media, there was that other layer of people that were reached and were able to donate.
Sure. I mean, that's amazing because I know, having spent hours with different organizations, anything is a lot. Anything goes a
Yeah.
long way. So $5,000, that's great.
Yes.
Um, the the Are there any other? You are involved in a few more, right? Before we cut that
I am, yes,
off.
yes, yes. So that was my main, actually was my main one, just because of the pandemic and the
Mhm.
impact that it had on Freedom House. But I also work with the Shiro Foundation, and the Shiro Foundation is a Las Vegas-based nonprofit. We have really big plans to expand worldwide, preferably in the future. But right now we're in Vegas. We do have some contacts in New York and Miami and Los Angeles as well. But our main focus is combating human trafficking. And the way that we do that, because we are a foundation, we reach out to other organizations, corporate or otherwise, that want to partner with us in the mission of ending human trafficking. And we either take monetary donations or in-kind donations, and then we allocate those to our affiliate nonprofits here in town. So we work with several rape crisis center type nonprofits here in town. We work with other nonprofits that house women and young people that are being rescued from bad situations, human trafficking, abuse, and so forth. And we either provide monetary assistance to them or we help funnel those in-kind donations to them. Most recently, we've partnered with a company called Girl Clothing, which I am just obsessed with. It's an amazing company, spelled GRRRL, so 3 R's, GRRRL, Girl Clothing. And I love the premise behind their brand. All of their clothing, they do not have sizes on their clothing. They size their clothing based on athletes. And if you go to their website, they have, I believe it's 5 different athletes and 5 different athlete sizes. So you might be a Sam size, or you might be a Heidi size.
That's
Uh,
awesome.
yeah, it's
That's
really
awesome.
cool. And the founder, Courtney Olson, is just an amazing woman. She really has a passion for fighting human trafficking, and she's partnered with us. She's donated over $5,000 worth of merchandise to the Shiro Foundation for us to give to our nonprofit partners. And she's been fantastic. Another organization, Shiro USA, they make panties. They make panties that are washable. Um, well, all panties should be washable, but let me be
Right.
more specific, menstrual panties that are
Mm.
washable and reusable. So we donate, take those from Shiro USA, and then we actually specifically donate those to another nonprofit here called Project 150 that caters to homeless teenagers. So that really helps those teens because they don't have to consistently worry about getting fresh tampons or fresh sanitary
Mhm.
napkins. They have those underwear that they can wash and reuse.
That's great. I mean, that's great. People don't think about the necessities like that, when uh, people usually think about just housing as well as food, but they don't think of other necessities that people may need. Um,
Yep.
Women especially may need, so that's
Yes.
great. And then let's see, how has that's just amazing, and it's great that you can use different platforms to help all these organizations, and also use the Mrs.
Yes.
contest, right? To and your voice there and your name there and your title to help pull in that exposure for these organizations. So wow, that's amazing.
And that's what we like to say in our pageant community is the sash and the crown in normal situations seem a bit much. But when you are out trying to draw attention and bring attention and bring a little glitter to a cause, that's in fact what we call it, is bringing a little glitter and a little shine to these causes that normally would not be known. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, yes, through some channels here in Las Vegas, you as a layperson can learn about nonprofit opportunities, but I mean, nonprofits themselves are on shoestring budgets, so PR and marketing are kind of low on the totem pole of priorities when it comes to serving the people that they serve. And so it's kind of nice to be able to take my title and my crown and my sash and go to them and help basically provide free PR and free marketing to them through my own social media channels, and just especially social media channels with the pandemic more used to. Usually we're out in the public a lot more, speaking a lot more to different groups about the various nonprofits in town, but especially since the pandemic, it's become a social media game for sure.
Absolutely, it has. I can attest to that.
Yeah.
um, the the I wanted to touch a little bit about your, I guess, the human trafficking, um, all your efforts in that. When did you get involved in that?
So I was in the midst of my MBA at UNLV back in 2016, and now a very good friend of mine, but at that time just a brand new acquaintance, Juliet Olzos, who serves on the executive board for the Shiro Foundation. She was a class behind me, and she and I hit it off, and we started talking about different issues in the community, and we both had that passion for solving a lot of these problems. And Vegas is a hub for human trafficking.
Mhm.
And she told me about the Shiro Foundation, and I thought, okay, well, I'm going to check this out. And I actually attended their gala virtually a few years ago via their silent auction. I was on a trip, actually. I remember I was in Seoul, and they had the auction going on. I couldn't bid off for it. I missed it, but I'm like, well, shoot, at least I'll try to bid on a few items via their Give Smart app for the silent auction. And I did, and I won a few. And my friend Juliet reached out. She goes, "Hey, you won a few things. Swing by this location, this office, TPC payroll, to pick them up whenever you get a chance." And so I thought, okay. So I was out running around with Mason, and my hair was, I was in yoga pants and a dry shampooed mom bun, doing my errands, and swung by expecting to grab these things and then run back out. And I brought Mason in with me and checked in at the front desk, said, "Here's who I am and here's why I'm here." And they're like, "Okay, just a minute." And then the founder of Shiro Foundation came out, who I later found out was the owner of the business that I was picking the items up at, Kimberly
Awesome.
Miles, who's amazing, just a dynamic personality. And she brought both Mason and I into our conference room and wound up having this great conversation for over an hour, and we hit it off. And she goes, well, would you like to become involved? I go, yes, I'm a little busy, but I'll do what I can. And that led to me having, after more conversations with Kimberly and Juliet, and then I later found out more of my friends were involved in the organization and spoke with them about it, and I wound up actually co-chairing their fundraising gala the next year, the following year. A lot goes into planning a gala, a lot. I learned a lot through that process. It's tremendous, but it was a hit. We had over 300 in attendance. It was a black tie event, evening gown. It was fun. Mark got to dress up in his tux and looked all handsome, and it was really great. It was a great experience, and then through that, I've continued to volunteer for the organization since then, and help out with several projects, and it's really been fun to see it grow. And what's really been rewarding is to see the funds that we raise via the gala and via other efforts go to the population in need. You know, before I was on the outside kind of looking in, and I would donate my time and my money when I could, but I never really got to, I knew it was going to good places, but I wasn't the boots on the ground person taking it to those nonprofits. Now I was on the inside, and I was actually taking these donations to Project 150 and the Rape Crisis Center, and these are different affiliates, and seeing the community and seeing the women and men that we serve. And that was really rewarding to me.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I asked that because at this airline as well, that you're involved with, they're involved with, I guess, their own campaign when it comes to human trafficking.
Yes.
So,
yes.
yeah, I didn't know whether or not that played a part, but obviously this is more personal than that, than coming from the airline. And I think this is amazing, having your son, you bringing Mason, as I do with my daughter. My daughter sees everything I'm involved in. Everyone knows she's going to be in tow, whether it's at a restaurant or she's going to be in tow. That's a mom, right? Today's mom. And I love how Mason is watching you and seeing you, with his own two eyes, seeing you, even though he may have been a baby, but seeing you study, do the testing, even though it might have been just a few days, and then getting involved in all these efforts and campaigns, and then all your nonprofits, as well as just basically everything that you do, because if anything, you're influencing your family the most, and that's amazing. But to pull it out and use your platforms, the passions that you have and the platforms of which you displayed them, to share to the world, and to give your heart to the world, heart and time, right, to the world. And I just think that that's amazing that you pulled now into that. The premise of the show is, the title of the show is called Under the Influencer. But on this show, what we do is we share with people, normal people like me or you or the next person in aviation, of how to use your voice, how to use your time, how to use your platforms, your social media platforms, on doing good, monetizing, helping a nonprofit, or just becoming better, just becoming better. And we inspire many out there just by the little nibs and little tips that you give, of how you transition from one thing to the other, or how you manage your life. So I'm going to ask you a few questions about being that influencer and having a social media voice. So when did you start your social media game?
Oh gosh, let's see. I first got my invite to Facebook from one of my best friends in college back in 2006, when I was in the middle of Air Force pilot training. And I'm like, what is this Facebook? Okay, fine, sure. Connect with friends, sounds great. And I did, and I loved it for that purpose. And I mean, that's the roots of Facebook. That was how it was born, was to connect people and connect friends, keep in touch with friends. Very innocuous and very innocent. And that's where I got my start. And then, I would post and keep in contact, just with that sole mission of keeping in contact with my network. And I love that aspect of it, because throughout my different career moves, and then Mark and I we've moved 9 times in 16 years of marriage. So we've met friends along the way that normally in conventional work, pre-Facebook world, we probably wouldn't keep in touch with.
Right.
And now we do, which is great. So that's where I got my start. And then Facebook, I still pretty much use Facebook for that purpose and for networking and getting to know, if I go to a networking event, the people that I meet, I try to connect with on Facebook to keep in touch with, either Facebook or LinkedIn. Instagram is really what I've found. I guess it appeals to me, and being a 38-year-old woman, apparently Instagram is where it's ours. It's our what's the word?
Space.
Space. Thank you. Yes, it's our space. And I love photography, and so Instagram was founded, of course, to share photos, and that was it. Again, share photos with friends or people who, we wanted to share photos with no other purpose than that. And then both platforms, Facebook and Instagram, turned into kind of more commercialized, and I think they may have gone a little off track in that way, but that's kind of the negative way that they went. But then another way that I see both of them have gone is for exactly what you touched on, is to bring awareness and advocacy towards different things. And that's really the vein that I'm focusing my efforts on. And Instagram, I really started to up my Instagram game, if you will, after I took some marketing classes in my MBA program. I had an Instagram account. I think I maybe had 4 photos on there. And I mean, I knew nothing about hashtags, and I had maybe a handful of followers, and then I took these courses in my MBA class. I thought, okay, well, I'm going to see if I can up my game and use my account kind of as a test bed to see who I can reach and who I, develop my own Dianna Klein personal brand, and use that as a test bed and a learning experience. And then the pageantry exposure even helped me develop that even more, because, and then the pageantry exposure plus the global pandemic of, okay, I can't get out and meet people face to face, so I'm going to get out and meet as many people as I can through social media. And that's really what I've done. And I kind of took it as my own personal project during quarantine of learning more about social media, learning more about the algorithm, which we all know is top secret classified, but how we can best integrate our brand in with that algorithm. How can we get our voice out there? And I learned more about hashtags. I learned more about different posting times. And then really what was an epiphany to me, and I look back, I'm like, why was this such an epiphany? But narrowing my personal brand, like people on my profile love the family plus flying plus pageant. Like they love the posts like that. And they love the posts that show me flying, or me flying with family, or me flying with Mark, or me flying with kids, and then drawing that into my pageant platform. Like those are the things that get the most traction. And I think that speaks a lot to where we are as a society. I think one of the silver linings of this whole COVID-19 pandemic is it's given people a chance to sit back and reprioritize. And I think people are reprioritizing community service and family, and trying to have that good, solid balance, as opposed to the working really hard and then playing really hard and missing out on the service in between. So very long answer to your question. I've learned kind of to hone my personal brand towards those things, my family, flying, and community service wrapped into one.
That's amazing. You wrote somewhere, don't ever believe that you are just the Jess. I saw one post where you wrote that, and that is a quote. Where did that come from?
That's me. I'm going to take credit for that one. Most of the things.
It is by you, but where did that come from? What made you, where did that formulate, that idea?
Yes. So throughout my whole life, like even growing up as a young girl and being a little nerdy and wanting to be a pilot, like being a girl and being a pilot just was not, that wasn't, it was very unconventional. And both of my parents encouraged me to be unconventional, but yet still try to fit a mold. And throughout my life, people would say, okay, well, don't worry, Diana, you'll change your mind. You won't want to be a pilot. You'll do something more conventional. Well, I didn't, and I became a pilot. Well, as soon as I became a pilot, then you have the other naysayers that say, well, you can't be a mom because you're just a pilot. And then or you can't be a wife because you're just a pilot. Well, then I became a wife and a pilot. And then they said, well, you can't be a mom because you're a wife and a pilot. You're just a wife and a pilot. So that whole just word, it was another I had to count to make sure it was another 4-letter word that just really like had a negative connotation for me, because I had constantly people telling me that I could not be something else because I was just this or just that. And when I started down this pageant path too, they're like, well, you're just a pilot. You're supposed to fit this female pilot mold, and you competing in a beauty pageant doesn't fit the mold. You're just a pilot. And it just really irked me. And so that's what that irking and that angst came out in that quote and in that post, because I'm a firm believer in everyone needs to be their own brand and be their own person. And whatever that looks like, that is okay. And no matter what anyone says, be your own person and don't just be a just.
That's amazing. Great words. Great words. I can't wait to snip that. How do you plan on growing on social media?
I look at that, it is, as you know, it's a full-time job. It's a lot. Social media is like another child. There's a lot of care and feeding, and rightfully so. Like when people comment on photos, I want to interact with them and I want to start that conversation. I would really like it to go more in the direction of using and I hear about some people's life experiences, and mine seem Cliff Notes length compared to their War and Peace length. But I feel like I've experienced a lot of things in my life and overcome some hurdles and gone through some stuff that, looking back, if I had done certain things, I could have avoided going through those things. And I would like to share that on my social media and kind of go more towards a, encouraging and, unique idea type of direction. And I know that's very vague, but kind of more, a little bit inspirational, but not just cheerleading inspirational, but, hey, I'm here as a resource. I'm here to help. And I've been through a lot of maybe what you're going through, and here's what got me through. And here's the post related to that is where I'd like to go.
That's amazing. Yeah. Great answer. Do you utilize different tactics on different social media accounts?
I do. So right now I have my Mrs. Nevada account, and then I have my Mrs. Dianna Klein account. So the Mrs. Dianna Klein account is me. It is me. And the pageant account is actually monitored and proctored by the pageant itself. So some things I post on both, but I really try to keep most of my pageant items on the Mrs. Nevada page, especially if they're more, I don't want to say especially if they're more of the social nature or more of the PR nature, but if they're more, I don't want to bombard my own account with all of my pageant work, and at the same time I don't want to put all of my, here's a cute picture of the kids with spaghetti all over their on my pageant account. So I do tailor it, but there's a lot of overlap too, because the pageant is very much a part of me and a very much a part of, my personal journey. But I will use some different hashtags, and we are requested to use certain hashtags on our Mrs. accounts, Mrs. Nevada or Mrs. State accounts. And so I'll sometimes post the same photo with different hashtags on each to reach different audiences.
That's amazing. And then how do you manage juggling your content and your posting?
Oh gosh, I've used several different platforms, and I'll be honest, I haven't found one that I really like the most. I was using Planoly for a while, and I think I'm going to go back to that one because the one I'm with now, I'm not a big fan. And I understand too that Instagram's purpose when it was first built was to instantly post photos of what you were currently doing. Well, now we're planning out our grids, we're, different
Mm.
strategies. And I honestly love, I need to be better about it, because right now I'm doing it kind of ad hoc. In the pandemic, it's funny how I'm calling that, as like, instead of earlier in the year, it's been such a polarizing event. Earlier in the
Mhm.
pandemic, March, April timeframe, I was planning out my grid, and I was tinkering with different patterns. So I was using that, worked really well. And I think I'm going to go back to that, because right now I'm just doing the old school. I write a lot of my posts up in the Notes app on my phone, and then I
Mhm.
research the hashtags real quick and post it on the Notes app, and then cut and paste. And that's not efficient. And I know
It's
that.
not efficient. No, I mean, that's how I started too. And then I realized it was just very time consuming, and it just pulled me in, having so many hats, it pulls you in so many directions, especially if you're, in a moment, where you want to post it instantly, and so that leads to my other question. When you see posts, what makes you say, "Oh, this is great content," or do you have a strategy where you, which you kind of touched on, like that you want on certain days, or when you're out and about, or do you plan it? Do you know that when you're going to um, your, I guess, shiro events, or any of your organizations, do you know that you're going to take a certain picture? How do you, like, what goes into the thought process of being a creator?
Right, right. No, it's a great question. If I don't have any, and the events are a big thing, because, and they're getting ready to start back up again as well. And a lot of the events are done via Zoom. So I'll do a lot of screenshot, of, hey, here's our group, via Zoom. And in fact, you bring up a good point. I'm a few posts behind. I'm lagging on a few things. But as far as the events, I mean, some of my posts are a day or two late. And one thing I do try to do and be conscious of is, when I'm away from home, when I'm on a trip, I try to post content on my social media channels that would lead one to believe that I was home. So you
Sure.
you might see a post of me talking about an event that I attended, and I won't include the date per se, unless that's super critical. If the date is critical, then absolutely I'll include the date. But I might post something that occurred a few days ago, but it makes it look like I'm in Las Vegas when I might be in Tokyo. And that's
For
more of a
sure.
security, not trying to
It
be
is.
fraudulent or misrepresent. It's just a security issue for my family. I don't.
Absolutely.
So,
I agree. I've always kept that in the back of my mind, that the minute you choose to go public,
yep.
which for you is bigger than me. Um, that decision to go public and your whole family's life exposed, your whole family being exposed, you have to make a few changes, and I remember being somewhere and just being in the moment. I took a picture and one of my followers showed up, and I was thinking that just was not the smartest thing, And so, even though Instagram is instant, like in the moment, um, it's in the moment, but later,
Yes.
So I can't imagine what you guys had to talk about, you and Mark had to talk about when it came to um, social media as well as competing, so yeah. And then as far as sharing your life, second to last question, as far as sharing your life, you have a lot to share, whether it's your workouts or your work, your commitment to the community, your family, your job. You have an awesome story. How do you have a strategy with what you share? I know this may be redundant, but do you, for those out there who are trying to get organized, who have a lot to share, like you, how do you organize that?
That's a great question. And that's one of my dear friends is starting a life coaching business, and she is using me as her guinea pig right now. And she mentioned that to me the other day. She's like, Dianna, you need to like focus, draw it down and focus on certain things. And she goes, you're everywhere. I go, well, yeah, but that's kind of me. I don't
Yeah,
know. And I don't, so that's a constant, struggle for me as far as how to organize it. But the one overarching, so how I do it, here's how I do it. I look at whatever I am doing, whether it's representing a product, or whether it's representing the community or out with my family. Before I post anything, and I hope this is seen. My intent in my posts, and especially in what I write, is to add to someone's life, to encourage, and not to make my life look any better than anyone else's, because the best advice that I was ever given was, do not ever wish for someone else's life, because everybody has their cross to bear. We all have our issues and our dark and our things that we have to work through. So I don't want someone to look at my feed and go, wow, I want her life, because I mean, trust me, that there's things you don't want my life. Like, yes, I have a lot of bright spots, but just like anybody else, there's negative as well. So I look at all what I'm getting ready to post, and the photos that I have taken of the last week, and I look at all those, and I run it through my own personal filter of, okay, is this going to help someone's life? Like, am I representing a product that will help someone's life, and how? And is this event with Mark and the boys posting about that, is that going to bring awareness to a cause, or will it encourage another family to go out and go hike in Red Rock, or will it encourage people? And so I haven't narrowed my focus, as my life coach friend told me to do. I've kept it as is, and I kind of want to keep it as is and keep it multifaceted, but yet post only those things and those parts of life that are encouraging and uplifting to others. And so that's how that's the first layer. And then the next filter I kind of run it through mentally is there a special, like, awareness month that I want to bring awareness to, like Addiction Awareness Month, Mental Health Awareness Month, things of that nature. And then I'll pull from that selection of content as to post and advocate for that. Then I kind of just work it into life. I had a great opportunity to take some teens up flying for their first flight back in September, and it was really cool. It was originally just going to be about 4 or 5 teens, and their parents came too, and they're like, can we go along also? I go, yes, of course. So I wound up taking a bunch of people, not just teens, but folks who had never been in an airplane before, up on their first flight. So when it came to posting about that, I wanted to make sure that I wrapped into that of, hey, these are first flights. This is opening a door. This is getting young people like hooked on life and not hooked on drugs. Potentially, it gives them a goal. So that was timely, and so I felt that was timely, so I posted it immediately. As far as the timing goes of when I posted.
Sure, great. My last question to you is, if you were to give any piece of advice to those out there who are listening and who are almost, may not have the same hats that you have, but have the same issues in regards to time, or just being involved in different avenues of life, what piece of advice would you give them in regards to opening up their social media account, or not being afraid to share? I mean, you've shared a lot already, but in a nutshell, what piece of advice would you give them?
My biggest challenge when I started upping my Instagram game was just getting started, like just doing it, because I would scroll through other feeds and I'd be like, gosh, these people have this perfect life, and these photos are tack sharp and have proper lighting, and their quotes are so good and their blurbs are so great, and there's no way. And I thought to myself, I'm like, I just need to start. I just need to start, and I will get better. And the posts are going to stink probably at first, and I'm not going to reach anybody, and that's okay. But just keep going. Just do it. Whether it's, you have 5 photos on your phone from the previous week and only one of them is good, and it might even be a little bit blurry, post it. Get it out there. Just start. Like, getting over that inertia and that fear of starting is the biggest thing. Just do it, and you're going to constantly get better.
Thank you. Thanks, Dianna, for being on the show. And for all you viewers out there, all her information will be in the caption below. And we'll see you soon.
Sounds great, love. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.